In a 1925 Swiss patent archive, there's a drawing that looks like it came out of a garden shed, not a laboratory, a metal box, magnetized plates, and a single copper conductor pointing at the sky. The promise was simple and dangerous to anyone selling farm supplies. More vigor, more harvest, no chemicals, no motors, no solutions you have to buy again every spring. Today we're putting that idea under a magnifying glass, passive electroculture. We'll separate three things the internet loves to blur together: what's documented, what's physically plausible, and what turns into myth when nobody measures anything. Stick around to the end, because you'll see how to set up a safe test in your own backyard, in US. Measurements, with a method that forces you to compare results honestly. Let's start with the first trail, the name that almost vanished off the map. Justin Christofleau doesn't fit the usual picture of the official scientist. He was more the type who tries, fails, tries again, and writes it all down as if the field were his laboratory. In the 1920s, he backed an idea that sounds strange today but isn't impossible, that plants might respond to something beyond the soil beneath them. A faint charge that falls from the air and drifts across the landscape all day, storm or no storm. His device wasn't a miniature lightning bolt. It was a system of copper and metal built to guide a weak charge down into the ground. He talked about crops that woke up, taller stalks, gardens that seemed out of scale. And like any good inventor, he did what inventors do. He turned it into a patent, with drawings, parts, and connections. The story is seductive because it has the kind of detail a fable usually doesn't: dates, registration numbers, diagrams. But a patent doesn't prove something works. It proves someone believed in it enough to put it on paper. What it does give us is an exact place to ask: what was he trying to capture? And how much of it is really there, over our heads? Back then, photos of enormous vegetables went around. Pumpkins like barrels, cabbages almost the size of a person, corn that looked like it belonged at a county fair. Images like that always do the same thing. They create believers and skeptics at once. The trouble is that a photo rarely tells you what you need to know. What was the soil? Which variety? How much water? How many plants failed just out of frame? And still, this never stayed just backyard fence talk. In the United Kingdom, through the first half of the 20th century, committees and reports tried to separate possible from fantasy. That tells us something. At the institutional level, at least for a while, the question wasn't a joke. The question was whether there was a repeatable effect or just a handful of eye-catching cases. Take the cold, methodical view, and the giant vegetable case falls into a classic trap. When there's no control, the story fills every gap. Take the curious view, and there's another reading. If that many farmers and tinkerers kept coming back to the electrical angle, maybe they were knocking on a real door, they just didn't know how to measure it yet. And that door is still there, today, floating over every acre. Even if your garden is silent, the air isn't dead. Between the sky and the ground, there's a natural electric field. It's not a shock, not something that makes you jump, but it is a real gradient, a difference in potential that, in calm conditions, usually runs on the order of tens to hundreds of volts per meter. In backyard terms, every few feet of height, the electrical level shifts a little. And who's standing right in the middle of that gradient? Your plants. Leaves out in the air, roots buried below. If the field is a gentle tension between top and bottom, a plant is literally a vertical, conductive structure full of water, salts, and living tissue. This is where copper enters with simple logic. Copper conducts better than a stem. Put a conductor in the ground, connect it well to the air, and in theory you could shift microconditions around the root zone, weak charges, ion mobility, interactions at the soil, water, root interface. None of this guarantees you'll triple your harvest, but it does explain why the idea isn't pure fantasy. It rests on background physics that's running 24/7, and when physics meets biology, the story gets more interesting than it looks. Inside a plant, it's not all water going up and sugar coming down. Plants also use electrical signals to coordinate responses, stress, damage, shifts in light, defense. That's not science fiction, it's plant physiology. The point isn't to turn a plant into a wire, it's to remember that life runs on membranes, ions, impulses, and gradients. That changes the whole frame. If an organism is already sensitive to its own electrical signals, then it's fair to ask whether a slightly different electrical environment could nudge processes like stomatal opening, growth rate, stress responses, or pest tolerance. Not as a magic switch, as a small push. And this is where the exaggerations are born, when a small, variable, context-dependent effect gets told as if it were universal. One gardener has a good year, credits the copper, repeats it as certainty. Another sees nothing and decides it's all smoke. The truth tends to be more boring, and, for that reason, more useful. If there's an effect, it probably depends on the crop, the soil, the humidity, the variety, and the climate. Which brings us to the least romantic part of the story, when a strange idea has to compete with a model that prints consistent results. In the early 20th century, industrial agriculture landed on a powerful recipe: cheap synthetic nitrogen, mass logistics, easy application, reasonably consistent results. Once something like that becomes the standard, any alternative has to clear a wall. Working sometimes isn't enough. It has to be repeatable, measurable, and profitable. That's where electroculture landed in an awkward zone. Part of it was passive, homemade, hard to standardize, and part of it started drifting into fringe territory. Coils with absolute promises, mystical explanations, words like energy with nothing measured. At that point, the conversation stops being technical and turns reputational. Researchers don't want to be linked to the weird stuff. Commercial farmers don't bet without numbers, and the market pushes whatever can be sold and repeated. You don't need a perfect conspiracy for an idea to fade out. Sometimes this is enough. No clean evidence, a lot of snake oil noise around it, and an industry that already offers an easy lever to raise yield. But even when an idea dies culturally, the scientific question can come back. And in recent times, some people tried to revive it with the one thing that leaves a mark: data. In recent decades, the topic came back wearing a different face: field installations with elevated wires, controlled systems, and yield measurements. Let's be brutally clear here. That's no longer the DIY coil next to your tomato. It's agricultural engineering, with protocols, safety, and above all, metrics. The most cited reports describe modest but interesting gains, not impossible harvests, but improvements on the order of tens of % in certain scenarios, and observable changes in pest pressure or vigor. What matters isn't the exact number the internet keeps repeating. What matters is the change in category, from anecdote to measured trial. Even so, there's a modern trap. Someone takes a result from large infrastructure and translates it into do this with a wire and you're set. It doesn't work that way. The value of those reports isn't to sell you hope, it's to remind you that the interaction between electric fields and plants can exist, and that it can be studied without magic. So before you touch any wire, we have to draw a line between two worlds: the passive and the dangerous. There are two ways to hear the word electroculture, and one of them shouldn't come anywhere near your backyard. The first is passive: copper as a conductor, no outlets, no batteries, no transformers. The second uses high voltage, suspended cables, electrical pulses, and real risk: electric shock, fire, equipment damage, human error. That version belongs to research or professionally engineered installations, not a home garden. The passive version, done right, shouldn't electrocute anything. It's a still conductor, drawing on what's already in the environment. The risk there isn't a shock, it's self-deception and inflated expectations. It's also mistaking orientation, shape, and mysticism for real variables. If this video does one thing right, it should push you the opposite way from magical thinking. Not believe, and it'll happen. Instead, test, measure, compare. And now the part you came for if you want to try it in the US, with clear measurements and without playing with fire. Here's a protocol that's simple, cheap, and serious enough to keep you from fooling yourself. Start with something you can find at any hardware store: bare copper wire, around 14 gauge. Shape it into a loose coil, don't wind it tight like a watch spring. A diameter of 2 to 8 inches works for a home test, with at least 3 turns so it isn't a compact knot. Bury the coil about 4 to 6 inches deep. Leave one end barely visible, or with a short piece rising up. Without it becoming a hazard for feet, pets, or the mower, place it 4 to 8 inches from the stem, not right against the root. If you want to include a classic variable, point the tip toward magnetic north with a cheap compass, but don't treat it like religion. If you can, set up another identical coil with no particular orientation, and compare the two. And here's the golden rule: you need a control. Same variety, same conditions, same watering, same sun exposure. If you change the copper and change the watering too, you've learned nothing. At the end of the season, the only thing that settles it is the total harvest weight in pounds, plus consistent photos with a tape measure. If there's no difference, that's useful information too. If there is, the next step isn't to shout miracle, it's to run the test again. Between forgotten patents, impossible photos, and modern science that sometimes confirms small nudges, electroculture ends up in a strange place, too real to be pure myth, and too exaggerated online to accept without proof. But in the garden, the truth doesn't need debates. It needs a scale, a notebook, and 2 comparable beds. If you ran this test in the US, which crop would you try first? Tomatoes, leafy greens, beans, or squash? Tell me what state you're in too, because the climate changes the game. If stories like this help you grow with a clear head and a bit of curiosity, leave a like, subscribe, and share it with someone who's got a backyard. This is Soilspire. See you in the next one.